All right, so it looks like the recording started. So good evening, everybody. As you can see, yes, there really is just two people in this class, but that is okay because I have to stick to a schedule just with life circumstances, so I can't back this up and wait for other people. So Hannah and I are basically just going to talk about books 7 and 8 tonight, almost like it's like loosely, almost like a podcast on book 7 and 8 of Paradise Lost. So we're kind of just going to run with that, and this might be 45 minutes, it might be an hour, it might be a little more. I'm not sure yet, so I do apologize if this doesn't meet the normal length, and if we don't get more than two participants in this conversation having dialogue. That just is what it is, and it happens sometimes. But I didn't want to cancel class, so I hope this is sufficient, and I believe it is much better than canceling class. So with that said, I was going to ask if there were any, I was going to ask everybody if there was any questions on just that idea of like the invocation of Urania at the beginning.
Oh, yes, that was super interesting. And he really emphasized that.
Yeah, so like, I know I talked about this in the overview video, so I don't want to like speak to it too much unless like you want to talk about it further. But was that like striking to you? Was it odd? Was it strange? Did you understand it later? Tell me about that.
Well, I definitely at first, like I was prepared for it by watching the overview video. So, but then when I was encountering it, certainly it was definitely a little strange because like throughout the poem, like you said, he appealed to the Holy Spirit as his muse. So it's interesting that he chose to appeal to an actual muse here. But then he really, as he like goes into this, you can see kind of what he's trying to go for, talking about like Urania being like heavenly born, and where else? Yeah, just talking about her heavenly form. So I guess like with her being the muse of astronomy, I didn't think a ton about this, but it certainly is relevant to the themes that are explored in the next two books. And it does sort of make sense. And I guess in the sense that these books too are like from the perspective of like the earth looking up towards the heavens in a sense, versus like a lot of the other books were more the perspective of heaven looking downwards. So we see like this changes perspective. So I don't know if that has to do with it either. And then also when he's talking about creation, I guess it's the perspective of heaven. I don't know. But it's kind of like she's like bridging the gap between the cosmos and the world. I'm not sure.
Yeah, now I get you. I pretty much said all I wanted to say about this in the overview video, so I don't want to like reiterate that or speak too much about it. But yeah, I thought that was kind of like that's going to be like really puzzling to people, right? Like without like some footnotes or some context. So, and it is kind of like just like a weird contrast because like he uses like the muse of astronomy, but then there's a sense where I mean, obviously, it's weird because like Milton's like obviously clearly interested in astronomy. Like you have like the Copernican revolution is like still like it's still like a pretty hot thing like in the 17th century when Milton's alive, right? Like it's not like us like today where it's like we just know the cosmology of the universe, or at least we certainly think we do, and we've accepted a certain view, and it's definitely not the Ptolemaic view anymore. Whereas it's more of an open debate in Milton's time. But on the other hand, like he also at times can be pretty critical of like, and I think you do kind of see this come out like with like Raphael and Adam in some ways, but he really is like critical at times about education really and just thought and speculation in general not being like well-rounded, like people who are just really abstract about like really wild like metaphysical concepts and astronomy and angelology and stuff like that. Like Milton has a place for that. He respects it. He respects astronomy in its rightful place of the quadrivium. But if you read his like I don't know if you've read his Of Education treatise yet, but he very much advocates for a well-rounded view. He's pretty critical of like the medieval scholastic approach to a lot of things.
Yeah. And that makes sense too, just with how quickly Raphael shuts down Adam when he starts to try to ask some of these questions that he doesn't need to know.
Yeah, perfect segue into what I wanted to talk about with some of this too. But we're gonna read lines 50 through 56 real quick. But it says this is just describing Adam and Eve. But he with his consorted Eve, the story heard attentive, and was filled with admiration and deep muse to hear of things so high and strange, things to their thoughts so unimaginable, as hate in heaven and war so near the peace of God and bliss with such confusion. But the evil soon, driven back, redounded as a flood on those from whom it sprung, impossible to mix with blessedness, whence Adam soon repealed. And it's a long sentence, so I'm going to stop there. But just in general, what do you think of Adam's appetite and hunger to learn and know these higher cosmological, astronomical, metaphysical type of things?
I do think it seems that the way Milton is portraying it as the reason God creates man in Paradise Lost is at least partially to replace the population of the angels that were lost in heaven. So the goal would be for mankind to eventually sort of, for lack of a better word, evolve into a greater angelic form. And so, Adam would be on equal plane with these spiritual beings. So it does seem that that's kind of a natural desire that God has put in him to want to desire knowledge that the angels have in many respects. And as he's acquiring it, in a sense, he's leveling up his own understanding. And I mean, I imagine it would be quite a distance from then when he actually would, if he had not fallen, when he would have achieved that status. But he's working towards it as he's expanding his knowledge of God and of the universe around him. So I guess I don't necessarily see it as a negative thing, although I also think he has to be careful of wanting more knowledge than is fitting for where he is at the time. So I think that's where Raphael maybe corrects him is, it's good to want to know things, but it's also good to let God reveal them in his time and to just be patient and trust that what God has revealed to you is enough for right now.
Yeah, for sure. Now, do you think that there is do you think this is also in part due to just the literal timing of where they're at in Eden, as in he's like, hey, I'm trying to warn you about Satan coming, buddy. It's no, it's not the time for this. Do you get a sense where that's the backdrop of this?
Yeah, I definitely think that it is definitely strange. I mean, it seems like Adams really wants to talk with Raphael. He's like, I really want to keep you here. I'm even going to tell you my story so you'll still be here so I can hear your response to it, which is funny. But I do think there's this sense of urgency, Raphael has this very important message about potential great calamity. And it almost seems as though Adam it at least seems from his reaction that he almost doesn't take it seriously enough, because he immediately just wants to ask about all these other things. And certainly that's good, but maybe Raphael is kind of there's a time and place for that. But right now I've just told you that the fate of all of the human race and the world and all your descendants is hanging in the balance right now. And you should probably go make sure Eve is okay right now.
Sure. And as a man, I try to think about my place in this. And first of all, yes, of course, there's going to be a disconnect because this is pre-Lapsarian Adam, and I'm post-Lapsarian Josh. Josh has only existed post-Lapsarian, so I don't even know what pre-Lapsarian me would be in a way. But there's a sense where I'm would I be oh my gosh, that's terrifying. I need to go protect my wife and make sure this deceit isn't coming, or would I be hang on, wait, Raphael's here right now. I need to ask him how all these things work, right? It'd be if and I'm thinking very Dante here, but it's if instead of ascending to Soul and Paradiso, if Aquinas could come down from heaven for an hour or two, and it's just what in the world would you ask him about, right? And it's if he warned you of something, would you not just want to keep asking him? But it's can you explain this part of the Summa? Can you explain that? How do angels work, man? It's tempting, right? I can kind of see how he gets there.
It's how Dante's always, in the Divine Comedy, he's always has these questions, and then Virgil just kind of looks at him and is I know what you want to ask. Go ahead and ask it.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. That's very much a thing there. But it's tough because there isn't, and I think the timing is really probably the key thing for me, at least, where it's yes, like great question. Now is not the time. But there's almost like a level, and maybe it can be wrong in a way because of you can argue that he takes the limitations of man's knowledge to comprehend such things too far. But on the other hand, there's almost like a virtue to just the natural unfallen like wonder that Adam has here. He kind of gives this argument in lines 96, 97, where he says, of his eternal empire, but the more to magnify his works, the more we know. Like he's like, God will be further glorified by my thought, my work, my deed, my act, like all of these things, if I know more about him and like how he actually designed the universe, right? It's like there's an interesting argument to be made there, because maybe there is some truth to that, but this this kind of just reminds me of like just like the essence of like the virtue of wonder, and we really see this in the classical tradition. We really see this in like Plato a lot. He mouths that through his character Socrates in the dialogues a lot, but specifically in the dialogue Theaetetus, there's this part where they have this dialogue back and forth, and I'm just going to read part of it real quick. But Socrates effectively says, these three axioms, if I am not mistaken, are fighting with one another in our minds in the case of the dice. Or, again, in such a case as this, if I were to say that I, who am of a certain height and taller than you, may within a year, without gaining or losing in height, be not so tall. Not that I should have lost, but that you would have increased. In such a case, I am afterwards what I once was not, and yet I have not become, for I could have not become without becoming. Neither could I have become less without losing somewhat of my height. And I could give you 10,000 examples of similar contradictions, if we admit them all. I believe that you follow me, Theaetetus, for I suspect that you have thought of these questions before now. Shifting to Theaetetus. Yes, Socrates, and I am amazed when I think of them. By the gods, I am, and I want to know what on earth they mean, and there are times when my head quite swims with a contemplation of them. I see, my dear Theaetetus, that Theodorus had a true insight into your nature when he said that you were a philosopher. For wonder is the feeling of a philosopher, and philosophy begins in wonder. He was not a bad genealogist who said that Iris, the messenger of heaven, is the child of Thaumas, wonder. But do you begin to see what is the explanation of this perplexity on the hypothesis which we attribute to Protagoras? So that line by Theaetetus right there, maybe I read too much, but I just had to do it. But that, and I want to know what on earth they mean. And there are times which my head quite swims with the contemplation of them. Like there's this, that's like the virtue of wonder summed up. Like that's one of the great quotes that we can always go back to, right? And so there's a sense where like Adam just, he wants to, his head quite swims with the contemplation of these things. Like Adam just wants to know them. And I think that's like a sincere and genuine desire. I think the question is really for me, like, is it really just about he's asking them at the wrong time or not?
Yeah. Or maybe just, obviously, like Raphael has a limited amount of time, and at the end he has to leave because the sun's going down. He needs to go back to heaven. So it also could be just the time constraints of I've had a lot to tell you already, and there's just not time for this now, like you're saying.
Sure. Yeah.
And that's not an appropriate occasion.
Yeah. And I like that it even says, like, in line 61, it says, led on yet sinless with desire to know. That's like describing Adam's, like his sense of wonder, right? Like this is he's sinless and desirous to know. So there's a sense where it's like this is just natural, like human unfallen wonder. Like it's still like a good and great thing. It's a virtuous thing. But perhaps like the lacking, if there's any lacking of virtue in that, it would be really just that it's virtuous in substance, but not virtuous in timing, perhaps, maybe would be the best way to describe that.
Yeah.
And I even like wonder too, and this is like I'm pulling from Dante here again in the Paradiso, where it's like at this point I would wonder if like Adam would just like his head would just be spinning with a lot of it. I mean, he's gotten like a story, right? But even like a story about like heavenly things, it's kind of like reading Revelation sometimes, and you really try to think of like what's going on. It's just kind of like it's like, oh, like I'm like that's tough. It's so abstract. It's so abstruse as well. Like it's compared to like something that's, you know, epistolary or historical narrative in a different way. So I wonder in a sense why Adam, if like how much Adam could even like handle, right? Like how much headspace, if you may, he would even have for that.
Yeah, it's definitely clear that, you know, his desire for knowledge is actually like this pre-fallen virtue of like wonder versus like the curiositas, you know, the vice of wanting to know something that you shouldn't or more than what you ought. So in like the pre-fallen world, it's hard to imagine like that anything that his desire to know, like his wonder, it's truly like unfallen. So, you know, he can't necessarily want anything, like desire to know anything within himself, have a desire that's for something wrong, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I get what
he
you're
can be
saying.
tempted externally, but he can't within himself come up with a desire for something like that he shouldn't.
No, that makes sense. I think you're on the right track there.
Yeah. So it is interesting. I think you're right that it really is just the time and place of it's not the place for questions about astronomy. I also think, you know, obviously Milton didn't really know, like you were saying, to which camp he belonged in the debate about, you know, cosmology during his time. So you notice he doesn't really commit to either when he describes everything, which almost he sets himself up for that so that he doesn't have to commit. Because if Adam asked that question and then he had to give an answer exactly of what it was, then he would commit himself to that.
No, for sure. So kind of just like moving on from that one, and you actually like, I was gonna ask about this, but you did answer it earlier on, so nice work. But lines 145 to 61. So this is like the story that Raphael is giving, right, of like God the Father like responding after the victory of the angels, and he says starting at line 145. Yet far the greater part have kept, I see, their station. Heaven yet populous retains number sufficient to possess her realms, though wide in its high temple to frequent, with ministerries due and solemn rites. But lest his heart exalt him in the harm already done, to have dispeopled heaven, my damage fondly deemed, I can repair that detriment, if such it be to lose self-lost. And in a moment will create another world, out of one man a race, of men innumerable there to dwell. Not there, till by degrees of merit raised, they open to themselves at length the way up hither, under long obedience tried, and earth be changed to heaven and heaven to earth, one kingdom, joy, and union without end. So I think that pretty much confirms that in Milton's conception of this, he's saying that, like, yes, like, if Adam and Eve, by like free will, ultimately chose to not listen to Satan, to continue to obey God, and to continue obeying him perpetually, that they would have essentially like ascended the hierarchy of being, like somewhere into the angelic hierarchy, like beyond the bounds of humankind, right? Like that's what I've kind of always gotten from this.
That's what I got from it. I mean, I'm not sure how else it would be interpreted, but it seems that they're seen as like, you know, filling in like what Satan has taken away in a sense. Not that, and he kind of makes it clear, not that that's needed, but just almost as this extra act, kind of even showing Satan like, you know, you think that you've just taken away something irreplaceable, you know, I can just create new creatures to replace you.
Right. Yeah. I thought that was like one of the more interesting ideas.
It was definitely interesting because that's just, I don't think I would have ever thought of that on my own. So Milton is quite the imagination.
Yeah, I don't know if I've heard that anywhere else, or at least I hadn't heard it anywhere else when I first encountered this.
Yeah, and it's interesting to think about, you know, what would have happened to humans on Earth if the fall hadn't happened, because eventually the Earth would have been populated to the point at which it couldn't be populated further. So, what would have happened? Like, would humans have kept going on Earth? Would they have eventually like become like ascended to a higher being, or would God have eventually like created a new, I don't know, some sort of a different realm? I don't know. It's pure speculation, but it is interesting to think about.
Yeah, absolutely, and that kind of does make sense. Even like thinking just like in the terms of like the spatio-temporal, where if humans were to perpetually just like procreate in an unfallen world, like eventually it would fill up, right? But if they became angels, and then like would some become angels over time, and then others would stay human, and then those humans would procreate, and then like those humans, then they would become angels, and their children would, you know what I'm saying? Would it be like just like a cycle in a sense? Like I don't know.
And I imagine there'd be a limit to how many humans there would be. Maybe.
Yeah.
I mean, I assume.
Maybe.
Who knows?
Yeah, I'm actually not sure, to be honest. I have no idea.
Yeah.
Even just I have this question here somewhere, but it's worth bringing up now. But it's like I thought this a lot, where it's like, why, if there was like a commission to like fill the earth, and that's like procreation isn't like a product of the fall, yet like Cain and Abel weren't born until after the fall, right? Like when you
Which
really
makes you think there's
narrative,
probably
it's
a
like
pretty
Genesis
short
3 fall, Genesis 4 Cain and Abel. So it's like, why, like, how did they not have children? Like, how did they not have children like before the fall?
I guess, I mean, what I think, and I mean, I was talking about this with my dad earlier too, and just like it was probably a pretty quick turnaround from creation to fall, because yeah, I don't know, because obviously I don't know, it depends on if you interpret like in Genesis as God creates the heavens and the earth, as also at that time he created the heavenly beings like the angels, or whether they already existed before Genesis 1:1, and therefore Satan could have already fallen. I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's hard to say. As a common response I've heard, is that like the creation to fall timeline was extremely short, and when we're talking like
I would not be surprised,
right? And it's possible, right? Yeah, because I mean, I still like am not sure how to think about that one specifically, but it's it's like a difficult thing to think through. Where it's like, why weren't Cain and Abel like born before the fall? Like, why didn't that just happen? Like,
it's really hard to think of a way for that timeline to have been very long. Who knows? I mean, I guess I could be wrong. I don't think we know exactly like the timeline of how long Adam was around before Eve was created necessarily. So like I guess there's a chance that he was around for a while before she was created. I don't know.
yeah, it's always possible that Adam was just around for like a ridiculous amount of time, but
I don't know if he'd be
wasn't around for a ridiculous amount of time before the fall, right? Like it's hard to say. When we get these descriptions even here, and I'm like totally just kind of going out of order here, but just
it's all right.
contemporaneously, he talks about like this part where there's these pairs of all the animals, and he's kind of like, hey, like God, like where's my pair? It's like, why am I alone? And then I have it in my notes somewhere, but essentially like God gives him like this it's kind of like depiction of like he's like, well, I'm like I'm the greatest of all beings. I'm the unmoved mover. I'm like the transcendent being by which all the universe comes from. And it's like there's not another one of my kind, right? Because there cannot be another like triune God. Like that just it doesn't make sense, right? It only makes sense if God is distinct and transcendent from everything else. But eventually, like obviously, like that is a distinct quality of like the divine essence of God that actually that's not really communicable to man in the sense, right? So maybe God in that conversation too is just in a way just kind of like educating Adam in a way, like kind of like Socratically just educating him, like asking him some questions, getting him to think about things, because obviously like God knows that he made man is very different in essence than God is. And he ultimately, of course, like gives him Eve, right? So like he always knew he was going to do that. Like God has perfect, omniscient foreknowledge. So of course he knows that's coming down the pike. But I found that dialogue pretty interesting as well.
Yes, that is interesting because I was like, what is going on here? And then like, God says like, oh, I'm just testing you to see, reflected my own image of your like rationality versus like the beasts that I've created. Which I thought was interesting because I was like, wait, why is Adam having to convince God to create Eve? And it's like, oh, he's just observing Adam, like letting him kind of come to that conclusion for his need for helpmate himself.
Mm-hmm. So I posed this in the video, and I also do apologize because that was like, like maybe like 30-ish hours ago. So I know it's not a lot of time to think.
Oh, it's totally fine.
And I was also hoping there'd be more people here to answer this question and get
okay.
But are there any particular passages in the creation account that you like jotted down or made notes of, or like just anything that you would like to mention in this space right now? Just because I think this is certainly just purely speaking of Milton as a poet, I think this is some of his best stuff in terms of just like his imagery, his symbolism, just his raw poetic beauty in a way. Mm-hmm. So was there any lines or anything that you wanted to share? Right now?
Yes. And I apologize I don't have exact line numbers because of this copy, but which is ridiculous. But at this point, I've already committed to annotating it. So
yeah, go for it.
But I like describing, let's see. Right before Let There Be Light, describing the Spirit of God over the waters. He says, darkness profound covered the abyss, but on the watery calm, his brooding wings, the Spirit of God outspread, and vital virtue infused, and vital warmth throughout the fluid mass, but downward purged the black Tartarus cold infernal dregs, adverse to life. So I really like that section. It reminded me of this poem that I like called God's Grandeur by Gerard Manley Hopkins. And it reminded me of the line where he talks about the Holy Ghost brooding over the world. And I like that imagery and the way he does that section. And then I enjoyed when he talks about the creation of the stars and the sun and the moon. I love that he talks about them as created without their light first. And then he talks about, he says let's see. And sowed with stars the heaven thick as a field, of light by far the greater part he took, transplanted from her cloudy shrine, and placed in the sun's orb, made porous to receive and drink the liquid light, firm to retain her gathered beams, great palace now of light. I love the idea of the creation and like him having this light, because there's always the question is like, how was there light before God created the heavenly bodies, But he treats that as like this kind of shrine of light that's like this vessel of light almost that he pours into all the heavenly bodies. And I love that imagery. I think it's really a clever way to put that. And it was very unique to think about. Yeah, I love just the idea of like the liquid light being poured into all the heavenly bodies and just his description of them. I loved describing the sun as jocund, which reminded me of like medieval cosmology with like the jovial influence of like the sun and the jollity or whatever. So I enjoyed all these little like allusions. I really liked the part where he talked about the heavenly bodies.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing. And I have to point this out, but like you mentioned Hopkins. So yes, like read Gerard Manley Hopkins if you're interested in poetry. That's my message to everybody. It's like S tier, like Victorian English poetry.
It's really, really good.
Hopkins, like double thumbs up. So I had to pull that one out. But no, yeah, thank you for sharing. I appreciate all of that. I like the lines here too, where it just kind of describes like the singing and what the angels are doing, like in the backdrop of this in a way. So 254, it says, by the celestial choirs, when orient light, exhaling first from darkness they beheld, birthday of heaven and earth, with joy and shout the hollow universal orb they filled, and touched their golden harps, and hymning praised God and his works. Creator, him they sung, both when first evening was and when first morn. just that beautiful imagery. And it's kind of like different than like the Ainur and like the Silmarillion, right? Or like
Yes.
like with like even like Aslan singing things and like the magician's nephew like singing like the universe into existence with like the creation account. But like there's still like this sense of like the singing in the background. So Milton's different there, but he still chooses to include. And it's hard to get around that just because of like certainly like biblical allusions to such a thing. Though I don't have that pulled up right now, so I can't remember exactly what the different translations say in scripture. But it's like that idea of there being like this harmonious like angelic choir that like that's like the sound, that's the song of creation in the sense, right? It's like what creation sounds like is that, and it's hard to even imagine what that sounds like the best choirs you could hear at like the symphony in like New York or London or wherever else in the world where you'd hear the greatest of singers perform. It's like far beyond that, and that's a cool thing to imagine, but it's also like mind-numbing. As always is with cosmological things.
Yeah, it gives me chills just to think about. Like,
it does, right? I know. Like I it's like the closest I could feel to how like Dante felt in Paradiso when I just when new things come and he like can't handle it. Like it's like that's I can barely handle it on Earth sometimes.
It's funny because like I just totally read Dante. This is like a side note. Like earlier this year, just like completely like I had some notes in the back of the book, but just like completely untethered from like whatever the scholarship and people talking about it. So it's so fun now to like hear other people talking about it. And, like, yes, like Dante like freaking out every time Beatrice starts to smile. It's like, no, it's too much.
No, exactly. Yeah, anyway. I'm always like tempted to like digress to like more Dante stuff, and I'm like, no, stop.
It feels very relevant.
Another time. Was there anything else you wanted to talk about in book 7? Just because I mean, you almost have to like sit there and just like read and like just mull on like stuff in book 7. Right? This is like, and I've talked about this in the overview video at the beginning, but this is like, book 7 is like the least, almost like in a lot of ways the least to be like analyzed of Paradise Lost. Like it has to work. It has to work on you like a painting. Like it's not. This is not. You know, it's like U Pictora Poesis, like right, Horace. Like this is not something you analyze. Like it has to be. The image works on you. Like just like a painting would. Like it's a word painting, right? Mm-hmm. But if there's anything else you wanted to talk about there,
no, not really.
Yeah, we can just like move on to. There's some interesting stuff in book 8 too, so I just wanted to make sure that was
fascinating.
There is a little bit more just like, you know, kind of like philosophical, theological ideas to be considered in book 8, just because there's more dialogue in general, I would say. So, but yeah, I think there's kind of already talked about this, but like you know, Adam kind of gets like at the beginning continues to really draw us into the fact that there's these lines where like Adam really draws us into the fact that we are just very small in the grand scheme of the cosmos. Says this world of heaven and earth consisting and compute their magnitudes, this earth a spot, a grain, an atom with the firmament compared, and all her numbered stars that seem to roll spaces incomprehensible. And there's a couple other points in this line, but there's really is you get this sense at the beginning. It's like this properly ordered virtue of humility, right? Just recognizing you're significant because God loves you and he made you and he has a specific purpose for you in some way or another. But it doesn't change the fact that cosmologically we're all just ants in that sense, in a humble sense. Though God doesn't treat us as we would often treat ants in a way as well. But I always love being reminded of that. It always takes me back to like the end of The Hobbit, where like Bilbo's worried and Gandalf's basically like, you just don't even realize that you're not really that significant. And then he says like, thank goodness, and grabs the tobacco jar again, right? It's just, I always love that image. It's we should all just want to be hobbits in a lot of ways, but I'm not going to digress into that argument.
Oh, I'll keep myself from digression.
That's how I try to live my life, by the way. Like I have a garden, I have a tobacco pipe. Like I do Hobbit things. So end of story.
Yeah.
So here's a question that's just kind of overarching question with Adam and Eve. You get a lot of this in book 8 specifically, but Adam is definitely portrayed as abstract, metaphysical, speculative. He likes these really intense, like abstruse concepts that only like angels can explain to him. And then Eve is kind of like, she's been like this whole time, right? But then she's kind of like, nah, I'm good. I'm gonna go tend the garden, and she goes off and tends the garden. And like, do you think? I guess like a couple of things here. One, do you think Milton's commenting at all on the nature of, I guess like abstract qualities in the essence of man and pragmatic qualities in the essence of woman? Like, do you think he's saying something about that specifically? And if either way, I guess like, would you agree with that, even if he is or isn't saying it? And we'll just leave it at that before I ask further questions.
Okay. So, okay, I'm not sure like how qualified I am to say, you know, his position, but I will say like it's very clear from the text that he's portraying Eve as, you know, with these more practical concerns, and Adam being defined by like being more interested in these abstract matters and intellectual matters. And I will say, like, although obviously you do want to be careful, like saying, well, that must be his position on all men and all women. I will say he's talking about the, you know, like father and mother of all mankind. Like these really are like the typological like man and the typological woman in a lot of ways. So at the same time, I also see that, you know, like obviously you could say, well, he's just portraying like, you know, there's these certain individuals' personalities. I'm like, okay, but also it's Adam and Eve. You know, they're really like kind of the picture of unfallen masculinity and femininity. So I think he is saying something here. Would I agree with him? Not necessarily. I thought about this, and I still have room to think about this, but I think in general, okay, I think, you know, especially during Milton's time, I imagine it could be easier to think some of the things he did, but I think where I would fall is actually, like, I would say it's not necessarily a gender thing, whether one is more of a practical person, like concerned with practical things, or whether more with abstract things. I would say there's a lot of men who are very concerned with just the practical. Like I was talking to my mom about this, and she's like, there's a lot of farmers out there and a lot of soldiers out there who, if they, you know, heard Adam start discoursing about cosmology, they'd probably just want to walk out of the room and start tending the plants too, you know? And, you know, likewise with women, you know, there are women who, you know, maybe this is more interest, and there are women who also would want to go out and be like, this is not for me. And, you know, like, for example, like in this, like, and it's not like devaluing to people who are just more practically minded. I mean, like, America was built on people who are very just like salt of the earth, practical minded, people who were like the farmers and the soldiers. All at the same time, it was also people who were very concerned with abstract ideals that helped kind of found the country. So you kind of see both at play. I would say I wouldn't necessarily agree that it's necessarily a masculine or feminine thing to be a more practically minded person or a more abstract person. I do think like there's different things, you know, like men in general tend to be more logical, and women in general tend to be more emotional. And I would say that almost leaves men to be more practical in a lot of situations, whereas they kind of need to take the women down from their back to like a plane of reality in some ways. So I don't know. I still have to think about this, and I do appreciate, like, you know, reading what Milton has to say about it and the way he portrays the characters. Like, I think there's a lot of good in the way he portrays Adam and Eve. I don't know that I would necessarily agree with the conclusion that all women are, in general, more practically minded. Although I would say there's certain ways that women might be more practically minded than men, and vice versa. I don't know. Those are my thoughts. But I also just read this today, so those are my first day thoughts.
Those are really great thoughts. I pretty much think along the same lines about this, because it's tough, because yes, like you can, and this is fallacious on the interpreter's part so often, where you take a you take a character who's an instantiation of some sort of, either it's a man or a woman, so they're in some sense an instantiation of that gender, or they're an instantiation of a type of person in a certain culture. I used it in my overview video, Jane Studdick, and
yes, people.
She's
really,
one, a female. She's two, an academic. So you put that together, and she's a female academic. But Jane Studdick is a character. Like, she doesn't represent.
She's not meant to represent all female
in all places at all times. She's bought into, you know, the secularism of the mid 20th century, and she goes through the conversion arc and basically abandons all of that by the end of the novel, right? Again, statute of limitations. If I spoiled that hideous strength for you,
oh no,
you can read it anyway. Not you. I'm talking
listeners.
about the listeners.
You're right.
Yeah, but yeah, but then you raise another interesting point where it's like, it's Adam and Eve, right? Like, that's what you said. So it's Adam and Eve, and it's like, this is like, did God create man and woman? Like, are they the archetypes, right? Like, that's like a really valid question. It's like, are they the archetypes? And if they are, does that just mean that, like, Milton's conception of man and woman is wrong, and is, in this sense, I should say? And if so, is that a product of his time, right? Because Milton doesn't live in a time where, you know, we live in a time where most men, like, had to go at, you know, 70, 80 years ago now, had to go and fight World War II, and a lot of women took over, like, the labors of men in the country to replace them while they were at war. And then, in a sense, like, some women went back, but, you know, it started to normalize women working. And so we're almost a century deep for, like, the first time in Western history where, like, women having, like, a career job is super normal now. Like, that is absolutely not the case in Milton's England, right? Like, absolutely, he'd probably be shocked if, like, he knew that happened.
Oh, absolutely.
That was going to happen for, like, 400 years after he died, right? Like, he'd be shocked by that. So I wonder if there's a sense where he sees just, like, you know, man is thinking, but thinking towards certain things, and that could even just be, like, representative of, like, him and, like, his intellectual circles, where a lot of the men he was around, because, right, he grew up with, like, the elite, like, the cream of the crop, like, the other rich boys who got to read, like, Homer and Virgil in the original languages and stuff. He didn't hang out. I mean, he might have interacted with them in some cases. He did live an agrarian life at some point, but he wouldn't have, like, been conversing with, like, the agrarian men as much as, like, the intellectual scholarly men. And he even lived in Italy for a while and was, like, talking to prominent Italian intellectual figures after growing up around prominent English intellectual figures. So what role does that play in this, right? Another important question to think about.
And that's just where I want to be, like, a charitable reader of Milton, because I wouldn't necessarily agree with all the ways that he portrays, you know, Adam and Eve. But I try not to, like, I try to also be charitable to him and not let my 21st century conceptions of masculine and femininity, like, while I can still disagree, I also understand, like, in his time, it was all, like, pretty much all men who were educated. So, like, first of all, he only would have really been interacting with men who had the education to, like, be on his level. And then also, like, the class he's part of, like, he basically spent his whole life isolated with mostly, like, a lot of other male intellectuals. And so, in that sense, you could see how maybe he has a bit of a skewed view if he's not getting kind of the whole picture of, you know, the average man. A lot of just the average guys, just like with average women, are not super intellectually abstract people, but they're very practically minded. So, but at the same time, like, I can understand why he would portray it this way, because in a sense it kind of reflects the world that he was a part of. And, you know, it's hard for him to have had a right view given some of the context of, or, like, hard for him to have a different view, you know, than what he kind of portrays here. You know, it's just like the cultural context, you're right, is just so different from ours today. I'm sure he would be very shocked if he came, like, just teleported to today. So
Absolutely. I think those are all just, like, generally just, like, really important things to consider with this. Because it's hard to say, and like we could obviously, I think like anybody listening to this, or really anybody alive in our 21st century American time, just knows that that's probably a more complex thing to identify than ever, because we all know men who are abstract. We all know men who are like hardcore pragmatists and could care less about anything we've said on this conversation so far. Really, they would, even if they could read Paradise Lost, they might not even want to or be interested. They might be bored with it, right? And we could say the same thing about, we could say one way or the other the same thing about like, women that we all know in a way. So like it's obviously very complicated looking at it from a 21st century lens, but I think it's helpful just to have like that context and to kind of really think of like what is Milton actually doing there. And I'm still not positive, right? But it probes a lot of thoughts, and that's
I want to make sure I fully understand what he's saying before I go up in arms about anything. As with any great books, it's okay to disagree, but you want to understand the context of the author and understand what they're actually saying.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Because he also, he still says some really good things. Like I love. Like some of the ways that he describes Adam and Eve, like I really do love. So it's not like you just throw out everything he writes about Adam and Eve. Like I think there's a lot of good there as well.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree. So we get in a lot of the beginning of book 8, really the first like 100, 150-ish lines or so. We actually do end up. This is kind of odd in a way because like we end up getting like a lot of explanation about things like cosmological, astronomical things from Raphael, but then we get to line 157 and there's this, this great conjunction to really transition it here. He says, starting at line 159, but whether these things or whether not, whether the sun predominant in heaven rise on the earth or earth rise on the sun, he from the east his flaming road begin, or she from west her silent course advance, with an offensive pace that spinning sleeps on her soft axle while she paces even, and bears thee soft with the smooth air along. Then he shifts to a warning here. Solicit not thy thoughts, what matters hid. Leave them to God alone. Him serve and fear. Of other creatures as him pleases best. Wherever placed, let him dispose. Joy, thou, in what he gives to thee, this paradise, and thy fair Eve. Heaven is for thee too high to know what passes there. Be lowly wise. Think only what concerns thee in thy being. Dream not of other worlds, what creatures there live in what state, condition, or degree. Contented that thus far hath been revealed, not of earth only, but of highest heaven. So Raphael explains a lot of stuff to him, but he also gives him a warning. So really, how do you square those two things where, like, why did Raphael explain so much to Adam about such things and then basically just tell him, but yeah, forget about those things. Like, you need to be focused on what I've warned you about with Satan coming.
I mean, part of me just thinks of like Milton writing this, just like he doesn't want to like, have a definite position on the cosmology. So obviously this enables him to kind of put it in perspective and almost like talk to people in his time and just people everywhere where these kind of scientific debates rage of, ultimately whether this or that, what ultimately matters is that God is in control of it and that this universe brings glory to him and you need to obey him. So he brings it all this scientific stuff that Adam's been talking about, kind of brings it within its proper place in life. And ultimately its proper place is in submission to God. Like all of creation exists to glorify him. And, he says like we ultimately, like whatever the result of these scientific conversations, whatever the result of, the knowledge you attain about the universe, ultimately, it doesn't change the fact that, it's ultimately of what your duty is. And then also just like leave them to God, God above. I guess like solicit not thy thoughts with matters hid. So I guess for Adam not to spend all his time right now, at least in this time, just thinking about these matters that Raphael has not yet explained to him and puzzling over them in a way where like he is not capable yet of being able to determine them, like they're hidden from him. So he'd basically just be spending his time thinking, but without any profit of like gaining new knowledge. And there's almost this warning of leave that to God, and you need to attend to what he has given you to be the ruler over, and you need to focus on that. Like focus on your duties that have been assigned to you. Don't waste time in idle thinking about things that have been hidden from you right now. You know, because the kind of thinking that doesn't and like contemplating doesn't lead to like greater knowledge, but rather like distracts from the duties that God has given you. Maybe that's what he's getting at here. I don't know.
Sure.
But yeah.
So you think that you think that in part at least that Milton just wanted to include that description in there of such things, like that it wasn't that like Raphael was like a mouthpiece for that. Am I hearing you right here? Like
I mean, it does seem so because he kind of uses the example of the position of the heavenly bodies as the example in Raphael's speech. You know, whether the sun predominant in heaven rise on earth or earth rise on the sun. And has this whole thing. He says, solicit not thy thoughts with matters hid, leave them to God above. So it is interesting that he uses that as the kind of the example of whether this or that here. So I'm not sure, like, it would seem, given what I've heard about Milton and like the time he was living in, that it may be like at least intended partially as a comment on that. You know, ultimately that whether these things, you know, almost like I'm not sure how much the debate was raging during his time, but he's almost saying like maybe he's almost commenting like people are placing an inordinate emphasis on this this scientific debate about the placement of things, and maybe they should be better off leaving that to God and, you know, focusing on obeying him rather than like endlessly debating. I don't know. I'd have to think more about that, but it at least struck me that he used that example.
Yeah, no, definitely. So do you see like a sort of weakness in Adam as a character here? Like specifically just like a weakness that like he himself actually has, like just as a man in this story.
I mean, it is interesting, like what Raphael's warning is like to think only what concerns thee in thy being, dream not of other worlds, what creatures there live. You know, just you need to focus on what concerns you and your being, because that would be himself and Eve and the garden that he's been entrusted to care for. So maybe that reveals like kind of at least a potential weakness. Like obviously he's not fallen, but like a potential area that would like could lead to disobedience or to the fall, is that Adam could be so concerned with things that don't concern him at all and dreams of other worlds that he neglects what does concern him. Like it's not properly ordered. You know, instead of focusing first on what concerns him and then branching outward to other things, he spends so much time contemplating things that have no bearing on him whatsoever, to the neglect of those things that do. And almost like, I mean, I don't know what's going to happen in terms of how he portrays the fall happening, but obviously like Satan does find an opportunity to tempt Eve when she's by herself. So, I mean, one wonders if maybe, and obviously like in my view of like I don't know, like Protestant view of the fall or whatever, just that, you know, Adam, you know, failed as the covenant head in like failing to, you know, properly lead Eve and prevent her from falling. And then afterwards, obviously, in choosing to fall himself. But I don't know. It's just interesting. It almost seems like foreshadowing, like maybe that could be a way.
So yeah, I think it's definitely clear that, at least I think, and it seems like you agree with me here, that there's like this definite weakness in Adam to get sidetracked with speculative matters.
Okay, yeah.
At the wrong time, right? Like he's he has his head in the clouds when he needs to have his feet on the ground, right? And when there's a time and place to have your head in the clouds, and there's a time and a place to not have your head in the clouds. And I don't know if he wants to have his head in the clouds all the time. You could argue that he doesn't, because he does like work in a sense, and he does like in scripture and in Milton, he gets this commission from God to work. Like we see that here in book 8. So clearly, like, he does work and he seems to delight in it and be satisfied by it. But there's still this sense where in this specific time he is seeming like sidetracked with abstractions, and that is sidetracking him from what Raphael's warning him about.
Yeah.
And even on that, and I think there is another weakness. We can get to that in a little bit. I'll be curious if you have thoughts on that when we get there. But so beyond this, like after this part of the text, in the next 100 or so lines, Adam really starts giving like the kind of this personal anecdote of like his earliest memories to Raphael, right? Like he starts talking about remembering what he can of like when he's first created, which in of itself is very interesting, because like Adam wasn't just like born as like a baby from a mother's womb, and like all of us, like you and I can sit here and be like, I have no idea what happened in my life from ages like 0 to like 3, basically, maybe even beyond 3 for some people. And it's different for Adam, but like what? Oh, bigger question, I guess, is like, it's like why is this even going on if like it seems that the point was that Adam isn't supposed to be going on about stuff like this? Like, why is he continuing to do that? Like, didn't Raphael just warn him not to?
Because Adam does have this response when Raphael basically kind of warns him. And he says, let's see. But apt the mind or fancy is to rove unchecked, and of her roving is no end, till warned or by experience taught, she learned that not to know at large of things remote from use, obscure and subtle, but to know that which before us lies in daily life is the prime wisdom. So that was interesting, because he's like almost acknowledging, like he has this whole speech, but then you're right, he does kind of continue. He doesn't ask questions, but he still wants Raphael to stay. He's kind of like, okay, I'll stop asking things. So he's like, can I tell you this anecdote about myself? Which is interesting. I thought that was interesting. Perhaps he shouldn't have, perhaps he should have said, okay, thank you for warning me. I'm going to go find Eve. But it is interesting that, I don't know. I'm not sure if that's like a sign of weakness there, but just the fact that he wanted to tell his whole long anecdote.
It just reminds me of that moment where like, and I'm like so guilty of this in my life, where it's like I'll have like a friend over and they're like, yeah, I should probably get going. I gotta work in the morning. And then I'll be like, oh yeah, for sure. And I'm like, remember that one time? And then like, I start talking about something, and then all of a sudden it's 45 minutes later, and then my wife turns to me and she's like, you're really bad about trapping people with like your conversations. She's like, people are like trying to escape the house and you keep talking to them. And I'm like, oh, sorry. I just like to talk to my friends, I guess. But it kind of reminds me of that, right? Like I'm guilty of that, so I can relate to that here. But
yeah,
here's another question. Is like, that says something about Adam, but what does it say about Raphael that he doesn't be like, all right, like, can it, Adam? I've had enough. Like, you need to get going. I'm taking off. Save your anecdotes for later. Peace out. I'll see you later. Like, why doesn't he just cut him off? Right? Like, what does it say about Raphael?
It does seem he's very curious to learn, to like look into the ways of God with man. He says basically like, how the angels like long to look into, God's redemptive history, like with mankind, and the things the angels long to look into. It almost seems like the same way he's kind of reflecting. He's like, nor think we in heaven, nor less think we in heaven of thee on earth than of our fellow servant, and inquire gladly into the ways of God with man. For God we see hath honored thee, and set on man his equal love. Say therefore on, for I that day was absent, as befell. So we see he almost kind of wants the inside intel. He was absent. He wants to hear about man. He has the same desire to know about man as Adam has the same desire to know about the angels. So I do think perhaps as the teacher, he should have recognized that this is not a time for him to learn more about the ways of God with man. But I don't know. It does sort of reveal his curiosity, his desire to learn more about man. And like, I guess not necessarily curiosity in the negative sense, because obviously like Raphael's not, you know, an evil fallen character, but certainly he has this desire to learn more that maybe he should have not prioritized at that moment.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. So we get this, I guess we get this part where like, he's talking about like his own creation. And this is kind of what more just me like noting something that we probably already know, but like I always do find it it's like a generally like, devotionally good reminder that it's like God giving Adam a commission to work, and thinking about like what this says and just the nature of the relationship between like work being like assigned in, you know, a pre-fallen world, a pre-fallen time. And obviously we get this in Genesis 3, like we get this sense where we get this language where like work becomes toilsome. Like it was just work, and it was like basically work was just good. Like it was like in an unfallen sense, but work became some other kind of work in some way. And I think it's weird because like it's a complicated subject in of itself, so there's probably not too much we should get into, but like I think there are like remnants of like pre-fallen work in a way, but maybe perhaps like the fallen aspects of that is like we've lost the ability to like work well without like complaint or fatigue or stress or things like that. Maybe
Yeah.
I do always love like just that reminder of like there being like a commission to work. And I think that can be like because sometimes you get this like concept of like especially in a personal view I do have is like I do think just American pragmatic work culture is a bit hyper obsessive with
yes,
not just identity in work, but even just like quantity of hours work. And I think when we compare ourselves to like, you know, the UK or like even like continental European countries, and there's pros and cons to both, right? Like, and I also especially don't want to sound anti-American 2 days before the 4th of July, by the way, right? But like, there's a sense where I think we can validly say that like we can be hyper obsessive about work, but we can also be, there's a temptation I think sometimes to throw the baby out with the bathwater, where it's like, yeah, like, you know, work sucks, and so we should just try to like do well in life with providing for our household, doing as minimal work as possible. And there's like that can be dicey too, right? Because there's this one, not being a woman, I can't speak to this, but two, I think it's very complicated just because, as I stated earlier, like women historically have not worked like jobs of like a vocation where they're like employed in like a trade or in a business or as like educators and such things until really the past century of Western history. And that is not the case for men, right? So it's like, does that say God commissioning Adam to work, and the fact that men have always historically been the providers, the gatherers, the hunters, the laborers in these ways, where women have typically been like the stay-at-home mom figures, has been like the norm for most of history. Like, does that just say something about like work and gender in a way? And this is not like I'm anti like women working case.
Oh no, yeah.
Like that's like it's a different world now, by the way, so totally different conversation. Not against it, but do you think there is something to that though, like just with like work and gender, like where like, because it's a debate, right, where it's like if you're like a Christian couple and like a woman really wants to work and she makes good money, and the man can be like, great, I'm going to be a stay-at-home dad, like is that good or is that wrong somehow? like just like it's an interesting question to ponder, right? It
Yeah.
can be offensive and difficult to answer, but is there something to that? Like, do men need to work?
I mean, I definitely fall on the conservative side of that issue. So I would say, I mean, I personally would be convicted that certainly all men should be filling the, if they're married, especially, they should all be working, but especially like if with their families, they should be filling like the role of the primary like provider and protector of the home. Like they need to be working. Like it's just they're not really fulfilling that calling, I would say, to work and to care for their family if they're kind of being like a stay-at-home dad. I know it's, there's many different perspectives. My perspective would be that would not necessarily be like, that would not be okay. And but I know it's like, there's a lot to get into. We don't have to get into like all the issues behind that, but I would say it is, it's work is good. Obviously after the fall, it's fallen. It's, there's thorns and thistles. It's difficult, but it's still important. Like I would say a lot goes awry when people are not occupied. And I'd say certainly men need to be occupied and channel that masculine like energy and strength that they have towards a good cause, towards work, towards protecting and providing, towards like contributing to the society that they're part of. And then obviously like, women shouldn't just be idle either. Certainly you can debate like the extent of where women should be focused, but certainly I would say there's definitely a natural role of women as mothers, and that therefore like being very centered around the home and domestically, whether they just are stay-at-home moms or whether they choose to do other things as well. There's certainly like the wife is very much centered around the home more so with her work. So that's at least like observations I think that, with the roles of men and women we see. It just, even just like by nature, like in terms of women being mothers, like that comes with a responsibility to have like this extra like care for your child and, and like care for the child in that way, like the physical needs of the child. And then the mother needs someone who's going to actually provide the financial means for her to like care for the child and help raise the child. But I don't know. That wasn't a very coherent thing. But
no, that was well said, and I'm like, I appreciate that answer because I know that could be a pretty loaded question, especially like on a recording, and like people could be pretty offended by, not even just like in like postmodern like progressive leftist circles, but there people in like even like some Christian circles might be like offended by that answer, and like I honestly have no idea if they should or shouldn't be. I would ask like anybody's perspective, but especially your perspective, you being a woman, me not being one, like that's valuable to hear in a sense. Because in my mind, like it's kind of easy to go the same direction with what you said, but I second guess myself where, so in my family, it's like I've always worked like often like like well over 40 hours a week, at least sometimes, not like every week. And my wife hasn't worked since like even like a little bit before we had our first child. And that clearly like in our marriage dynamic just works extremely well, right? Like this setup, if we reversed the roles where I was a stay-at-home dad and she worked full-time, we would both be really miserable. And I've always wondered, I'm like, is that just us? It's back to like the archetype versus instantiation thing. I'm like, is that just like our personalities and dispositions, or is this say something bigger about like the nature of like man and woman, right? Like that's it's complicated, right? Like it's tough to answer that, but I do think about these things from time to time still.
I would say that you can say that it does, while not forcing people into stereotypes in terms of what kind of providers or what kind of mothers people are. And I mean, often like I just think in our 21st century world, like the role of a stay-at-home mother, of like a homemaker, is just so undervalued, and people just don't see it as even a job, when it really is like you're raising young souls, and there's so much involved in that. And I just see so much in what it means to be a woman that is involved with like nurturing and caring, that really facilitates that, I would say, woman being designed like for that role. And obviously like, every woman's different. Like we all have different personalities. Like my mom, does not fit the stereotypes of women. Like every man and woman kind of falls outside the stereotypes of a gender in different ways. Like my mom teaches my brothers how to like mow the lawn and like do household projects. Like she's just a very practical person, and my dad's more of the abstract, loves books and things like that person. And so it's kind of like a reversal of roles. But my mom is still like a stay-at-home mom. She still like embodies what it means to be a woman. She's not less of a woman because or like an unbiblical woman because she likes to mow the lawn or do house construction projects. It's something more fundamental than like external personal preferences or personality. And it's certainly, I guess I would just say too, it's not a mistake, the gender that you're created as well. God did not, make a mistake with the gender he created any person. And so with that, with any conversation about gender, you have to acknowledge there's a purpose to it. I mean, we can disagree a little bit about what exactly that means, but there is a purpose. It's not arbitrary.
Well said. So moving on. Pretty. Sorry, did you have more for that?
I was just gonna say, I think you see that in Paradise Lost.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I brought that up because it's obviously super relevant there. So I just kind of wanted to play around with that idea a little bit. So no, thank you for your answers. I appreciate it. But just to kind of move on from that, definitely it could be a weighty topic, but good towards the end here, just because for time's sake. But I found it like interesting. Like this is like after like Eve is created, so we're at line 500 now. But kind of like the interesting like nature of like their relationship.
Yeah.
And, like, it's not just like it's not like an instantaneous, just like it's like, oh, I love you too. Yeah, let's get married. Like, boom, get married. It's like there's like a process. It's almost like dating or courtship in like a small way, and I found that kind of interesting. And I'm not exactly sure why, but line 500 is like, she heard me thus and though divinely brought, yet innocence and virgin modesty, her virtue and the conscience of her worth, that would be wooed and not unsought be won, not obvious, not obtrusive, but retired the more desirable, or to say all. Nature herself, though pure of sinful thought, wrought in her, so that seeing me, she turned. I followed her. She what was honor knew, and with obsequious majesty approved my pleaded reason. To the nuptial bower I led her blushing like the morn. So it's kind of like there's like this process where like, there's almost like Eve has like this delicate dance that she does. She's not just instantly just like enamored. Like she needs to be pursued, right? Like that's like what it is, right? It's like that's like, and it's I think this is another thing about the nature of like man and woman in relationships, where it's like, I mean, like, maybe you feel this way, but it's like I'm married, so it's like I can say it's like I had to like go through a process where I had to like pursue my wife, right? Like it's not just like it's not even if she did like me before that process, and she did, it's like it still required, it necessitated that process, right? And it's like I think there is something to be said about that, where it's like you have to like
absolutely
men, like you have to like, even if women are more outgoing or maybe more direct in the relationship at the beginning, there's a sense where it's like you still have to, as a guy, like it's like your rite of passage, like you have to like, you have to have some virtuous courage and just go for it, like even if you're not great at talking.
Yeah, it sets the tone for the whole relationship and marriage. And if men are going to be the leaders in the marriage, if their wives are going to submit to them in according to a scriptural way, like it's not going to set a good tone if the woman is the one initiating. And like I can say, like, for my own parents, my dad is like super quiet and shy, and my mom is like super direct, super extroverted, super confident and outgoing. But once he knew, like he worked up the courage and asked her like pretty much right away, like, so it is like, you're right, it's like a rite of passage.
Yeah, you have to go for it at some point. Like it's just necessary as like a man. It's like you have to like, and women have to be, the virtue of courage exhibits itself. It's like it's necessary for any human being to be courageous, to be virtuous, right? But it's like in some ways that it may look different for men and for women. It's like you got to have like You got to like cultivate like that like knightly chivalric virtue of courage in some way or another as a man. So it's like I think that's just one of the ways it manifests.
Yeah. I thought it was interesting too, that like Eve was like blushing like the morn, and some of the descriptions was just interesting. Almost like, I guess she wouldn't have been ashamed, but just, I guess it's, I don't know. It was just interesting to think of. I don't know, just the way, I don't know, that's portrayed. Just her reaction to Adam, like she, she's blushing, she's, kind of turns away. It is interesting to see. I guess, is there something to that, like in like the female nature that's, or at least like in Eve, that's like it's not fallen for her to, not immediately just want to like marry Adam, and there's something where she even like has some almost, I guess not shame, but she's like blushing, and that's not necessarily, I guess Milton's saying that's not necessarily like a fallen aspect of the world. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, so like there's kind of like this and this is maybe, or if any single men listen to it, they need to take notes, but it's like Adam kind of has like this poetic waxing in a sense, right? Like it's like that's how he wins her over, boys. It's like that's maybe that's what they need to do, right? Like if anyone listening to this is hoping to find a wife someday, maybe that's the secret, right? I don't know, but of course, like Adam's gonna wax poetically, and
that's just
it's
how
part of the process, right? And I do love that. That's fantastic. But this leads into a question that I thought of. So I talked about how Adam has like this weakness, right? And like we think of so in Aristotle specifically in his work, like the Poetics, like he talks about this concept of like the tragic hero, where it's like they have this what really constitutes a tragic hero is like having this fatal flaw that really kind of leads to like their failure, their demise, their downfall in the story, right? And so we could argue that it's that Adam has that fatal flaw of speculation, and his feet aren't on the ground. He's not taking his really leadership duties on the ground well. But is it also possible that Adam's fatal flaw is that he's enamored with Eve in a way that can also be possibly problematic? Is that possible? Yes. And does Raphael see that even?
Yeah, I definitely seem to reach that conclusion just from reading it, and even the way Raphael seems to correct him. He goes into this description, and of course, Adam kind of talks about, Eve, not being like as inwardly and like intellectually equal to him, which like okay, but then he gets into like her actual like appearance, and he says that her loveliness, so absolute she seems, and in herself complete, so well to know her own, that what she wills to do or say seems wisest, virtuousest, discreetest, best. All higher knowledge in her presence falls degraded. Wisdom in discourse with her loses discountenanced, and like folly shows. So it almost seems this almost dangerous attraction to Eve, where when he's in her presence, she's just so beautiful that he almost basically it's just like, whatever you say, I'm not gonna, he almost kind of falls into this like role where he's not really leading and like guiding her, but more if he's like just so taken in by her beauty that whatever she said, even if it might be something that wasn't in line with wisdom or higher knowledge, he might still be taken in with it because she's just so beautiful that whatever she says seems to be wise and virtuous and best. And so there's almost this risk of like his attraction to her almost like potentially posing an issue if she were, now she's not fallen right now, but if she were to fall, then where he could be persuaded likewise to do so, because he's almost too like just enamored by her beauty that when he's in her presence, it's hard for him to to make judgment about the truth of like what she's actually saying, because he just thinks, oh, it must be good what she's saying because she's just so beautiful. And then Raphael basically points out like, don't desert wisdom, and kind of points out that he's really like almost like too concerned with a lesser good in a sense, and he should be more concerned with the higher good of wisdom and virtue rather than just like physical beauty and his relationship with Eve.
Yeah, I definitely think this just says something too, and the fact that like this is pre-fallen, and Adam has this like this enamored feeling with Eve, and it's kind of like there's a sense where like Raphael sees this and he sees that they could potentially go wrong.
Right.
It's not properly ordered, really. It has to be like a properly ordered like love and desire, right? Like properly ordered eros, like in a way. And I think this is just like this has also something to do with like just like the nature of man, and then like you see the privation of the good of this like in certain forms of sin. And it's like, I mean, you think of like the David and Bathsheba story, maybe that's like the hard, like obvious, like vice, like sinful version of this, right? Like it's like that's like a very perverted, like corrupted, improper desire. Like it's all of that gone wrong in a sense, right? Where it's like that doesn't obviously happen in any similar way here with Adam, and it doesn't happen this way before the fall. But you see like echoes of that, right? Like there's something there like in the substance of man, but because of like sin entering the world, it's like man is like all the more prone to do something like that, to like, make the, arguably the greatest error that like David made. Like
I do see like foreshadowing. I mean, how many times in literature and in life do you see like men who like basically fall to this, or basically there's like a woman that they're enamored of, and then she may say or incite them to do something that's wicked or wrong, but because of their love or like passion for her, they basically will do it. And instead of being able to subordinate that to to wisdom, to virtue, it basically runs out of control. And obviously it's like not the fall yet, but I also was kind of like, when I was reading this the first time, I was just definitely was like, this seems like some foreshadowing for potential disaster.
Yeah, definitely. Was there anything else from book 8 that you wanted to discuss? Because I think we're running.
I guess I did enjoy kind of Raphael's last little commandment Adam and Eve use. Be strong, live happy, and love. But first of all, him whom to love is to obey, and keep his great command. Take heed lest passion sway thy judgment to do aught which else free will would not admit. Thine and of all thy sons, the weal or woe is is placed. Beware. So I enjoy like his last kind of message to them. And his ultimate message to them is obey God. To obey him is to love him, and you should love him above all. And then just the warning: don't disobey this commandment. So I guess Raphael, I know you kind of mentioned in some of the like overview videos of like how good of a teacher like was he, and certainly I guess like you could say maybe he shouldn't have let Adam just keep going on, but I do think like he does a good job of he portrays this histories of what happens in heaven like in a very compelling way, and he so frequently reminds and redirects Adam to this warning. So it is kind of like how much more could he have done? Adam, certainly you could argue maybe Raphael could have done this or that better, but ultimately Adam did have warning. And so ultimately like he's very responsible for choosing to fall.
Yeah, I've definitely like hinted at this and probably even outright said it at least once, if not more than once. But this would be interesting too to like get other perspectives. So maybe we'll do this like in the next class or something. But
Yeah.
yeah, like thinking about like how responsible, like, is there any sense where like Raphael like failed as an educator, or is it really like he gave Adam all the tools that he needed to be successful, and he squandered them, right? Like it's hard, it's difficult sometimes, like how much to actually place the blame on like the educator and the student in a sense, right? Like that's like is the student just is this like there's always like this saying where it's like, oh, like the student failed and that means I failed as a teacher, and it's like there's a sense where that statement can be true, but I don't think it's like universally always true.
I mean,
It's
the
like,
student may
the student just does fail, and like there's nothing you can do for them, and it's like, is this the case with Adam, or is there something else Raphael could have done better? Like, could he have been like Adam, like cut it with the personal anecdote, like get on your feet and go like watch out for your wife, and like for like a creepy serpent looking thing or something like that. Like, right, like should he have, is that something we could point to, right? Like it's hard to say that the responsibility doesn't ultimately fall on Adam, but does it, in a non-ultimate sense, like does it fall on Raphael in any way, right? Those are things to like just consider. We don't even have to necessarily answer that right now, but I would love to actually get some perspective.
That would be a good conversation to have in a future meeting.
Yeah, I'll write that down, and I'll think about it more, but I might bring that up just for the beginning of the next class, just to kind of segue into book 9. But I was gonna close with some lines, and then you ended up just reading the lines that I was gonna close with. So yeah, very nice job.
I was like, this will be great lines to close with. I should have realized you probably would have.
No, impeccable taste. I was gonna do the same thing, so I think we could call it that. So thanks everybody for listening who stuck around with this. We're gonna cut it there, so we will pick up with book 9 2 weeks from now. Thank you and God bless.